Okay, today is Tuesday, March 25th of 2025, and we still have two chapters, chapters 7 and 8 of part 1 of 1984 to discuss in class, and we're going to do that. I'm going to make this video today to try to get it posted soon for those who are not taking the part 1 test on Friday. And once it's posted, it'll be there for all of you so that you can watch it at your leisure in order to review. All right, I have all versions of the quiz in front of me, and I'm going to run through them and tell you what you need to be prepared for. You need to be able to recognize the opening line of the book. The very first line, part 1, chapter 1. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. You won't have to write it out, but you need to be able to recognize it. You need to know that Winston lives in Oceania. It is in what it still seems to be called the City of London, but the country in which he lives is no longer called England. So he lives in Oceania. You need to know the name of his apartment complex, which of course is Victory Mansions. That's another thing we learned very quickly in chapter 1. You need to know where he works, which is at the Ministry of Truth. You need to know that nothing is illegal in Oceania. So if I were to ask you true or false, nothing is illegal in Oceania, you would select true. We discussed this in class and the implications of nothing being illegal. Winston believes that women are the staunchest adherents to the party's doctrine. And he states this very explicitly at one point. This is the main reason he is so distrustful of the dark-haired girl early on, whom we will soon find out is named Julia. You need to know that Sam is Winston's friend. Well, Winston even says one does not have friends nowadays, you have comrades. And they have a very interesting discussion over lunch one day, during which Sam says, "We are destroying words, scores of them, hundreds of them, every day." Because, of course, Sam's job is working on the Newspeak Dictionary. And so he has a very thorough knowledge of how they are altering the English language and also why. And he shares some of this ideology behind the reasons for it with Winston while they are eating lunch one day. You need to know that at the end of the first chapter, when there's a knock on Winston's apartment door, he is afraid that it is the thought police. It's not the thought police. It is his neighbor, Mrs. Parsons. But he's written in his diary for the first time, and he's very nervous about that. And so when there is a knock on his door, he fears that it is the thought police. You need to know that the most serious offense in Winston's world is thought crime. Something we have not discussed in class together yet, but we will. I believe this is at the beginning of chapter 7. In his diary, Winston writes that any hope of revolution against the party will come from whom? And I'm going to ask you to supply me that answer. And the answer to that is the proles. And we will discuss that further in class for those of you who will be in class the next 2 days. In chapter 3, Winston has a dream. And we've talked about the dream in class. He dreams about his mother first. He has the really sad dream where he kind of sees his mother and his sister almost like at the bottom of a well, or he describes it as a sinking ship, and he cannot get to them, and they are just moving further and further away from him. And then Julia, or the dark-haired girl, as he is still referring to her, she is also in the dream. When he wakes up from that dream, the word Shakespeare is on his lips, and he doesn't know exactly why. It's because Shakespeare is part of the ancient world, and Winston has very murky memories of that time. There are 3 nations, or really what they probably are is a conglomeration of former independent nations that have formed in the aftermath of World War II in the world that Winston lives in. One of them is Oceania, which is where Winston lives. You also need to know the other 2 are Eurasia and East Asia. You need to know, this is at the end of chapter 1. It says, without realizing it, Winston writes what line over and over again in his diary, and that is, of course, down with Big Brother. This is something we discussed in class today. This is discussed in chapter 6. Winston concludes that the party views sex as a way to produce future party members. You need to know, at the beginning of chapter 6, which is what we discussed today, Winston is writing in his diary, and he is recording a memory of a time that he slept with a prostitute. And this leads him, of course, to thoughts of his wife. We discover that he is married to a woman named Catherine. Another thing you learn in chapter 6 is that the party's sexual puritanism, or their demands on people regarding who they can marry and why they should have sex, these demands are not imposed on the proles. You need to know, and these are things we will discuss as we move through the last 2 chapters in part 1, 7 and 8. The line that concludes chapter 7, it's a very important line and concept in the novel. This is the concluding line. I'm quoting it. Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. If that is granted, all else follows. That is the last line of chapter 7. We're going to meet one more character in part 1, and his name is Mr. Charrington. He owns the shop, sort of the antique or the junk shop in the Prole district, where Winston finds the diary. He's going to return to the Prole district at the end of part 1 in chapters 7 and 8, and Winston has a conversation with him. And in that conversation, Mr. Charrington says, I never had one of those things. They're too expensive. And what he is referring to, those things, is a telescreen. So he's letting Winston know, I don't have one. And his shop is in the Prole district, and so that is a luxury that is affordable to him. He's not going to pay for it with his life. Okay. In chapter 8, which is the last chapter of part 1, Winston is thinking about something that some of you have asked me about, and that is committing suicide. And basically, surely these people thought about that. And Winston is thinking along those lines because his life is just, it seems inescapable. And so his thought process at the time that he says this is, even suicide needed desperate courage, because you couldn't get a hold of drugs, pills, a weapon. If you were determined to end your own life, you had to figure out a way to do it. And a lot of those ways were not surefire, certain to end your life. And so he says of committing suicide in chapter 8 that it took desperate courage. So we will discuss that. We haven't gotten to 7 and 8. We will, for those of you who are going to be in class, but I wanted to go ahead and get this filmed and posted. And for those of you in class on Thursday, we will watch this on Thursday. Anyone else who needs to can watch it in their own time. All right, we're right at about 10 minutes, and I will wrap it up.